Hello everyone, welcome to my SAS Global Forum 2020 talk. My name is Chris Barefoot, and today we'll be talking about natural language understanding and more specifically annotating training data for natural language understanding. Let's just jump right in. So I figured we'd set a base level for what are we really talking about when we talk about natural language understanding. It's a pretty wide topic in computer science, and so we're really, given the short nature of this talk, going to focus down on a specific piece of it. And so when we talk about NLU, what we're really talking about is understanding free-form text that we might receive from users. That text is obviously a natural language that the user is speaking or typing, and we want to understand something about it. And so today, more specifically, we're really talking about intent classification and slot filling. And so what I mean by this is that when we receive a piece of text, we want to classify it into a known set of categories or classifications of intents. So what does the user intend when they provide the text that they're providing? And then more specifically, within that piece of text, are there certain entities or key terms that we need to determine? And do they fill certain slots in sort of a broader intent? So that's sort of setting a base level for what we're talking about. So let's talk a little bit about how it's actually trained in this case. So we are talking about supervised learning. So all the data that we're talking about is annotated, and that it fits into a known set of sort of categories or classifications for the machine learning to determine and then further score or classify things into. There are three key terms that we'll talk about as we talk about this training data. The first are intents. So these are the broad categories that things will be classified into. So for example, we might have one called order pizza, where we're going to think about all the different ways that a user might say that they want to order a pizza. Within an intent, you have utterances. So these utterances are the actual training data items within an intent, the various ways we expect people to say these things. And this is really what we're going to hone in on today, how to better flesh these out so you can get good accuracy with your NLU domain. And lastly, we're going to talk about entities. So within these utterances, within these pieces of training data, you'll want to identify certain terms within them for a variety of reasons. One reason you might want to identify those terms is just to say that these terms are special within my sentence, that I want to key in on that these things are occurring and kind of highlight their importance within the sentence. Another reason you might want to highlight them is to add variety. So maybe then in this case, order. Maybe there's different ways you can say orders. You can say purchase or buy, and they all mean the same thing within your domain. And furthermore, things like toppings, pepperoni and sausage, another way you could vary the items that you expect to hear from users without having to specify them all out by hand. And furthermore, these entity values could be captured more than just a hard-coded list of, let's say, certain types of toppings. You could have some sort of named entity recognition going on in the background. You could have regex matchers matching on pieces of a text. So that's another way entities can be a little more powerful than just, oh, here's an enumerated set of terms. So as I talk about it today, I'm going to draw parallels to image classification, mainly for a number of reasons. I myself am a visual learner, so I think it's going to help as we guide along to think about how an image classification might work in parallel with text classification. And second, I'm a car guy, so any chance I get to show cars on screens is a good thing. So let's think about image classification and specifically about the variety of training data we might provide. And I want to talk about specifically quality over quantity. So unlike maybe image training data, text training data can be hard to come by and requires a lot of hand annotation ahead of time. For that reason, we're often dealing with smaller data sets rather than larger ones. So if you had, let's say, this training data set for image classification on the left, do we think it would be able to classify a car like we see on the right? Probably not, right? It's got a brighter color. We're talking about the back of the car. All we have is front end images over here. So let's think about this in the same way where we might think about text. So the first thing we'll talk about in terms of variety is phrasal variety. So think about the different ways people might phrase things to mean the same thing within a domain. So in this case, we're still talking about ordering a pizza. it's just as likely that somebody might say, how much does a one-topping pizza cost, as what will you charge for a one-topping pizza? Or for a one-topping pizza, what's the current price? So you can imagine there's lots of different ways people might phrase these, and you want to, just as you would want to take different images from different angles of a car, want to approach this as what are the different ways people might say the same thing, all of which is supplying better training data to the machine learning underneath the covers. The next thing you want to think about is sort of verb-specific variety. So for those action words in your sentences, how can you vary those within your domain such that they still make sense? So in this case, please delete the file named input.json. You can imagine replacing and having an entity list with delete of also maybe remove, trash, destroy. But the thing I want to caution here is that, we might say, well, shouldn't it know that trash and delete are the same thing? Well, every domain is different, and every domain uses terms in specific ways. And so in general, synonyms are a pretty slippery slope. And I've included some words at the bottom that, if you were to just pick up a thesaurus, are said to be similar or closely related to the word delete, but in our specific domain instance here make no sense. So just keep that in mind as you're building out specific entity values. The next thing I want to talk about is less is often more. So if I were to say, hey, here's an image that we can add to our car classification data set, you'd say, huh? I mean, yes, there are two cars off in the distance, but there's so much noise here in the image. And if we look at the second image, okay, that's slightly better. I can tell there's cars in the image, but there's still a lot of background data here that some sort of machine learning algorithm is going to try to make sense of before it starts to identify that there's cars. And lastly, this last image is still better but you can tell there's clearly pictures of cars, but there's still a lot going on. So I want to parallel that to text. We need to think about the same thing. So if I were to say on my shared drive, if no one has it logged, delete the file named input.json. This is a perfectly valid utterance you might receive from one of your users. And in it, inside your domain, you need to determine what are the things that are important for this intent, for this action actually being carried out by the underlying system. So if it is important that it's a shared drive and that no one has a file locked, and you need the file name, maybe this all is important, but realize when you supply this utterance, you're telling the underlying algorithm that all of it is important. So furthermore, if we start to peel back the layers of the onion, you could say, on my shared drive, delete the file named input.json. So this is a little more generic. Right now we're just talking about, deleting a file named this, maybe on a shared drive. And as we peel it back more, delete the file named input.json, and then just delete the file. As you're building a domain, just think about each layer of this as sort of how generic do I want my intent classification to be. If I'm only concerned with deleting files, maybe the last one is perfect. If I need to know the file name, maybe I have some of those as well. And don't be afraid to mix and match them as well. This isn't an all or nothing. You could have, let's say, the last two utterances as a piece of training data, meaning you're going to capture maybe more generic statements about deleting the file, but you're also going to capture ones that require the name be specified, and just know that at runtime, you'll have to handle both cases, one where the file name might be present and one where it's not. But just know that the more language you put in a training utterance, the more restrictive you're making the algorithm. And one word of caution, so as we kind of peeled back those layers of the onion, you could see where, I could just get down to one word and I say that is the way to classify my intent. And I just want to caution people against single word utterances. So in some cases, they work really well, things like yes and no, where you want to just classify, hey, is somebody saying an affirmative or negative? But as soon as you start having utterances and training data with just one important term by themselves, like download or error, just realize any time a user's utterance that they're supplying might have one of those words in it, you're going to classify it as that general intent. And so sometimes that's okay, but often you're going to end up misclassifying and sort of overfitting your data. So just keep that in mind. Lastly, I just want to talk about always consider your domain when you're creating these and really the specific language that your users might use. So I've got pictures of race cars here. These are cars, but more specifically, it's a certain subset of cars, right? And so similarly, when you're supplying these utterances for training data, think about what are the types of things you expect users to say, and then what are the boundaries between especially closely related intents within a system, and how much ambiguity maybe are you creating with blurring those lines. So the clearer you can kind of separate things into separate intents, which have very concrete differences, the better off you're going to be. And so lastly, I just want to plug that all of this is applicable in SAS's new product, SAS Natural Language Studio. This is a chatbot framework, one piece of which is natural language understanding. And inside of here, we've built a really nice GUI to basically help you train all of this, this NLU domain data using natural language examples, using just WYSIWYG, click and highlighting of entity values, and a couple different matchers to allow you to specify whether you want entity values to be matched very generically or very specifically. So go ahead and check that out and let us know if you have any questions. And thank you very much for your time.